And we are live, back with another Boxing Squared live stream, wherever you are in the world, morning, noon or night. Thank you for joining me, be it live or if you're listening on archive. I do thank you for stopping by. In this live stream, we're going to have a little bit of a newsy sort of start to the live stream. I'll go through a few different things that have been in the news. In of themselves, I wasn't too fast to do full videos at this point. Some of it is still sort of speculation in that realm where promoters are telling us one thing, and I mean, it's really hard to know how much we can really believe because, they're talking, so they're probably lying. I mean, I know that we want an undisputed fight and such, but I mean, I'm not convinced that that is happening anytime soon, no matter what Bob Arum or Eddie Hearn is willing to tell us at this point, bearing in mind that they want to keep the dream of that fight alive, so they have to keep bubbling along. But we'll get to that, a number of topics, and then I'll dip into your comments. So wherever you are, thank you for joining me. So we've got Queen's question marks in the building. IB Freely, good evening to you. It's evening here in New Zealand, wherever you are, morning, noon or night. Do thank you for joining. So Gareth in the building, BJ Desmond as well. So there's a couple of topics which I'll start with, newsy sort of bits and pieces that have been floating around, and then we'll crack into a bit of comment and questions from the chat. And we've also got Joseph Bacon, who's just joined over. So we've also got Lee, the bald guy in the building, Marcus from Norway. Stefan says hello and Happy New Year. Happy New Year to you. Happy New Year to one and all. So I'll just do one or two things at the back end of just uploading the thumbnail while it's live. It's actually quite interesting. I did a little bit of a test on this a little while ago. Without the thumbnail, does half as well when I have the thumbnail. So that's interesting to me, at least, because there's all these little things that you got to test and trial just to sort of see what works. And having a thumbnail with some boxes in it certainly does seem to attract more viewers. But anyway, I'm sort of rambling at this point. But there's a couple of things that I'll touch on first. I'll just have a drink of water just to clear my throat there, just a sec. So Eddie Hearn confirming to different YouTube channels, the media, that Dillian Whyte, Alexander Povetkin 2, it is going to be happening in early March the 6th. So that will be as part of a run of shows. Obviously no boxing in the UK at the moment, although there was only one Matchroom card in January before boxing was cancelled. But they're announcing some stuff on Friday UK time, but he has actually said, yep, Whyte Povetkin 2 is going to be on March the 6th. And it did actually make me think, because remember when Alexander Povetkin came down with COVID and he pulled out, and his management and Povetkin himself put out statements that said, yep, it'll basically push things back maybe a month to 6 weeks. But in the sort of period after that announcement, Dillian Whyte, also Eddie Hearn and a couple of people associated with that sort of camp, etc., started talking about, well, Dillian Whyte might be able to have a fight in between. And I didn't cover it at the time because to me it just seemed like complete hogwash, because they'd said Povetkin's camp, it might be like a 6-week delay at most. So I never believed for a second that there was going to be 2 fights in 4 months. That just didn't seem probable for me, so I ignored it at the time. But it was amazing how much coverage it got in the mainstream media, and some of that is because obviously there wasn't a lot of rounds. So, a decently high-profile boxer saying some stuff like that was going to get some coverage, and it did. But I was a little surprised by how many people got sucked in by that. And I guess one thing that might happen now that that rematch has been confirmed, it was always going to be happening and always going to be happening next, because there was the talk for a second of a potential fight in between that one. I guarantee you, there'll be a few of the fighters who put their names up, or put their hands up, I should say like a Luis Ortiz. There was 1 or 2 other fighters that will say Dillian Whyte's ducking me now. But that is the peril of Whyte and co having actually mentioned, and effectively for PR, for headlines, just something to keep, their sort of names in the sort of sphere, keep things bubbling along profile-wise. But yeah, it never seemed to me credible that that fight was, an interim fight was going to happen if the delay was only going to be 4 to 6 weeks. And effectively, I think it's bang on about 5 weeks or so from what would have been a January 30th show to now March the 6th. So that rematch, anyway, that's a good one. We'll come to that in a moment, but I'll get to a couple of other topics, then I'll open it up to some comments and questions. So keep your powder dry for the moment. We'll get to a couple of comments soon. So I will be starting towards the bottom of the chat. So thank you for joining me here. I'll say that again. Do appreciate it wherever you are in the world. So we're going 9 here in New Zealand. If you're UK, America, further afield, welcome along wherever you are in the world. I do thank you for joining me. Also, we've had Bob Arum, Eddie Hearn making some statements in recent days, basically saying that, you know, all is looking well for Anthony Joshua versus Tyson Fury. So Arum specifically saying, I can report that everything so far has been going splendidly. We hope to have a signed document within the next couple of weeks. We're all on the same page. I'm 95% confident the fight happens. And to me, that 5% of wriggle room is probably more than 5%. That sort of gives me the shivers because I don't think that fight's happening. I don't think it's happening at any time soon for a couple of reasons. And I actually did a sort of more in-depth piece on Patreon sort of talking about some of the reasons why it's not happening in 2021, because I really don't believe it is. I don't believe Joshua's going to drop a title. I think he will end up facing Alexander Usic. Tyson Fury may end up facing Deontay Wilder. I think we're in a bit of a holding pattern because what's going to happen with the mediation for Tyson Fury, what's going to happen with the WBO mandatory for Anthony Joshua. And there might be a don't blink situation. Which thing's going to end up being announced first as something's happening on either or with those two different issues. But I think it would be highly optimistic, especially throw in the COVID times, you know, a once-in-a-generation type fight with the potential to generate massive sums of money. I can't see them leaving money on the table. But if you do want to check out my Patreon, patreon.com/boxing squared. And they have actually, because my Patreon was rated R18 for whatever reason, maybe because it was, you know, a fighting sport or something like that. But that has been changed now, so it is more just a general channel. So it wasn't my idea for the R18 rating, but it can be. There was an issue because you couldn't actually find it if you were searching on the app. You could find it directly on the website, you know, using the patreon.com/boxing squared, but it is now searchable on the app. So I just thought I'd throw that out there. But moving on to another topic, which I'll be keen to get your thoughts on in a moment. Filip Hrgovic and Michael Hunter. Looks like it's dead in the water. Kalle Sauerland has said that it's not happening next, and they're targeting Hrgovic versus Martin Bakole. And you may have seen from social media, if you follow Filip Hrgovic or Pedro Diaz, Diaz is actually in Croatia. They have been running a camp in Croatia, so clearly preparing for something. What that something is, a little unclear. Maybe it's just sort of some sort of tick-over camp. You know, that's still quite a big cost involved in doing something like that. They clearly must be angling towards something or hoping that something is coming up in that sort of window, perhaps on one of those Matchroom cards, 5 to be announced by Matchroom on Friday. The schedule for this time of the year is looking pretty light. Obviously, not much in January at all. There was going to be that Dillian Whyte card, obviously, that got cancelled. It's some time ago now. That took away some fights. This whole other, and I'll come to this as well, because Mahmoud, Charr and Trevor, Bryan, that card looks like it's falling apart in the seams. I've already done a video on this, but I'll get your thoughts on that as well. But I guess the other thing coming out of that piece of news with Filip Hrgovic and Michael Hunter not going to be fighting, what of Michael Hunter? And I'd started on a video on Michael Hunter, sort of, you know, what does 2021 hold for him? But I was sort of holding off because I wanted to know, well, where was that potential fight with Filip Hrgovic going? Because they were all talking, let's get this fight done, send me the date, send me the contract, let's get this made, let's have this fight next, let's just get it done. But it's not done. And I did say recently, I thought that fight may not occur, and it probably comes down to money. After Hunter was dropped by Matchroom, I think there was a case to say they just didn't want to pay him the sort of sums that he'd been getting paid previously on that DAZN deal. They cut him loose. If they were bringing him back in for a fight, and clearly they were trying to shoehorn Michael Hunter into a fight with Filip Hrgovic. So it was almost like, this is the guy we want you to fight. This is the sort of money we'll probably offer. I mean, that's just speculation in terms of what the offer is, but it's probably not what Michael Hunter was wanting. Hence the fight not getting made. And it's a shame because Hrgovic and Hunter would have been a real humdinger. I was also had a quick chat online with Cassius Chaney. He was going to be fighting in Russia on the Sergey Kovalev and Bektemir Melikuziev card, but it looks like that may not be happening, so potentially due to COVID that card it may not go ahead. I haven't sort of caught up with all the details if that is official at this point, but he wasn't hopeful that that was going ahead, although I'm not sure who the opponent was. Anyway, I'll just get back from my notes to the chat. So we've got 35 in the building. So thank you for joining me here, wherever you are, morning, noon, or night. I'm not sure the chat seems to have the chat window seems to have stopped working. That could have possibly been because I did switch over from the 2.4 gigahertz from 5 gigahertz. One of them works better for the live streams. If I keep it on 5, it just sort of dips out all the time. So yeah, apologies if you can't see that scrolling through. So I can actually see your comments in my chat box, but on screen on your phone or tablet or computer or wherever you're watching, however you're consuming this, you may not be able to see it. So apologies, I should have switched that over before the stream began. So I'll start sort of near the top of this first page that I can see. So Kenneth says he would quite like to see Luis Ortiz versus Joseph Parker. It's an interesting fight, but I mean, I think if they're not in the same promotional camp at this point, you know, there's not many sort of top 10, top 15 guys facing each other unless one of them is a promotional free agent. So God of War says Happy New Year. Happy New Year to you too. HB says he's sick and tired of hearing about Wilder Fury. Have we really been hearing too much about that? It's gone pretty quiet. It just seems to be dragging on. And I think from Wilder's side, the longer it drags on, at least from the outside looking in, maybe that lends a bit of credence that maybe there's something in it. I don't know. We'll just have to see. But it is taking longer than initially we'd been led to believe it would take. I mean, originally we were told it would potentially be wrapped up by Christmas. So Tom says, if Whyte loses a second time, he is going to plummet down the rankings. Well, that does happen if you do lose. Kenneth says, Andy Ruiz versus Charles Martin. I'm hoping this happens. I think I would definitely, that would be a fun fight. I mean, there would be a lot of heavy leather landed. I'd quite like that, but I would be picking Ruiz to win that one. Not so sure that one happens. It's sort of, yeah, I mean, I could see a situation. I mean, I guess it depends what happens with Wilder and Fury, but down the line, if Wilder and Andy Ruiz, they're the two biggest heavyweight names at PBC, that makes a lot of sense to make that matchup. BJ Desmond says, do we think Parker walks through far? I'm not so sure that he's going to walk through far, but I definitely favour him to win that fight. I mean, when you consider Farr as the taller man, he's height and reach advantages, that sort of thing. He knows Parker from the amateurs. There is some sort of shared history there, you know, splitting amateur wins to a piece, etc. I think he will just keep it long and try to frustrate Parker. I think there is going to be, Joseph Parker's going to have to, you know, work for this win. It's not just going to be some sort of walkover. I think you're going to see Junior Farr trying to keep it very long, trying to win off the back of the jab. And I think Joseph Parker will have to rely on those fast hands, but he's going to actually have to try to get inside. And he's not a great inside fighter. I mean, there seems to be all this chat about Joseph Parker. What could he have done against Anthony Joshua if that referee had have let him, you know, etc. But, you know, when has Joseph Parker at the world level shown a really good inside game? He's sort of more from the mid-range to the outside, and there are points in fights where he does sort of look to go into sort of energy saver mode to some point. You know, rounds sort of 5 to about 9, he does seem to taper off, and, you know, there is circling, you know, jab, right hand, that sort of stuff. Anyway, I do think he will probably win that fight, but I don't know if it's going to be as easy as people think. I'd be surprised if it was a sort of early knockout. Bearing in mind Parker isn't necessarily, the biggest puncher either. I think he is going to need to break down Junior Farr if he is going to stop him. I could easily see that one going to points, and depending on game plan, Farr's not completely out of it, but certainly he's an underdog for a reason. His resume doesn't really stack up compared to Parker's, but then again, these fights aren't fought on paper. So Ruben says, do you think it's worth Dillian forgetting about the title shots at this stage and focus on the big fights outside of the top three? Well, I'll just stop there, because that's what he's done pretty much for the past couple of years. So that has been his focus, and until he gets a title shot, that probably remains his focus. He is actively, sort of shunned different title eliminators to fight money fights. And not knocking him, that just is what it is. But he will continue to be one of the more even if he loses this fight, to be one of the more bankable heavyweights. And I'm sure even if he loses to Povetkin, I mean, that's another really tough, good fight, another even competitive matchup. I mean, I could totally see him dominating stretches of that fight again, but still being stopped. Then again, I could see him turning the tables on Povetkin as well. Remembering Povetkin did look, a step slower in that fight, but he still, he's got that power and he's got that pedigree and class, and he managed to prevail in that first fight. But, there are, if he wanted to, there's rematches with Parker. I mean, I'm sure there'll be some demand for a potential Chisora trilogy fight. I think there are options for him regardless of a loss. Marcus says, Andy Ruiz looks like he's in good shape. Any fight announcements? No. I haven't heard anything yet. I mean, there was talk that something would be, sort of in the works or announced this month, but I mean, I think part of what has been happening, and this is just my own theory, because the bulk of the PBC heavyweights sat at the back end of 2020, I think it was just about money. They're having to operate within certain envelopes from Fox, FS1 cards or on Fox, the main channel, or Showtime, whatever. Within their deals, they've only got a certain amount of money. The heavyweights generally, they are paid more. Even guys like Chris Arreola probably, even though Arreola is washed at this point, he's probably getting quite a larger chunk of change compared to even some guys who are on the come up who are, pretty good prospects or even, coming into their prime. It's just the fact the heavyweights do get paid a bit more. So remember, you've got the likes of Brazil, Luis Ortiz. You also have Charles Martin, Adam Kovnatsky. They've got an option on Robert Helenius. It looks like Helenius and Kovnatsky, the rematch will be made. I'm sure because they can't make any of those guys, any combination of those sorts of fights, pay-per-view. It's a case of money, so they had to sit them. And when you consider that they threw Luis Ortiz in, November, I think, and topping a bill facing Alexander Flores, that was just a pure tune-up, and it was a cheap opponent, and it was a cheap card. They were operating within the envelope. So maybe we will see a little bit more of that, but potentially, depending on the, if there's some big pay-per-view events coming up for some of the bigger PBC stars, maybe they can whip some of those heavyweights on those cards. Or you may see, it depends on how big the fights are. I mean, how much money's around really depends where some of these guys land. So Deviant Video says, what's your take on Usic and Hearn? Well, I've been saying for some time, and I was talking about this a few times on Patreon, actually. I've seen cracks in that relationship for some time, and I know that his deal is either done or it's done after a Joshua fight. And prior to that sort of news coming out, my take was that as soon as Usyk can leave, he probably leaves. And my sort of inkling was, well, he's got some friends and obviously close, training partners and, Lomachenko, etc. on Top Rank. I mean, I could totally see him bolting somewhere else. I mean, but then there's a case to say that maybe he'll use some of this sort of stuff as leverage, get a better deal. I mean, he's co-promoted by Hearn, not outright. But yeah, I mean, it would seem to be if you want the bigger money fights, Usyk's not going to get a pay-per-view in the United States. It's more likely, and because he's already had a couple of pay-per-views in the UK, that's where that sort of money is. But I'm not sure what he's been getting paid. So it's hard to know. Would ESPN, because obviously the cruiserweight status, and if he continues to do well at heavyweight, they might be able to stump up a decent contract for him, potentially. Corbina says Anthony Joshua versus Andy Ruiz is going to be a knockout in favour of Anthony. Well, they don't have that fight. There's no third fight made, and based on the first two, I might say that's unlikely. I mean, Joshua knocked out in the first fight, and then obviously you had a 12-round decision for the second. So I would be, leaning towards a decision win for Joshua or a stoppage win for Ruiz. Either of those combinations. Not sure Joshua would be knocking out Ruiz. I mean, Ruiz has got a granite chin. We have to remember this. So Jay says, what's up with Zhang, heavyweight guy? Is he going to step up and fight a contender? Some of that might be out of his hands. It just could be that simple. I mean, obviously there's a lot of guys within that matchroom stable at the moment. Not a lot of them have been fighting each other. I wouldn't mind seeing any combination of, Hrgovic versus Zhili Zhang, or even Zhang versus Bakole, or Zhang versus Huey Fury. Some of these guys with, especially Zhili Zhang being, 37, 38, I mean, he needs to pretty much be in the biggest fights that he can get in right now. And he's signed on with one of the biggest promoters in the game. So if he can't get a meaningful fight, well, I mean, it's probably to some degree out of his hands. I don't know. I mean, there's no real sort of finessing him towards a title because he's not ranked high enough across a number of ratings. He's going to need to beat someone good and make a statement. I'm just not sure that, I mean, he's just left his run a bit too late in my view. He's a decent fighter. So Pound for Pound Boxing says, big up Boxing Squared, and big up to Pound for Pound Boxing. Lee the Ball Guy says, I honestly think if Wilder does not get the Fury fight, he will retire. It's the biggest money fight he will get, as he will fight Wilder now. He has no belt. Yeah, but he doesn't necessarily need to have a belt. I mean, I think you could easily make a Wilder Andy Ruiz pay-per-view. It's probably the biggest fight within the PBC stable that they can make. It makes a lot of sense. You can build a narrative around that. The winner kind of goes on to contend for world honours again. I mean, I think that's quite an interesting and entertaining fight potentially. And then Jay says, what about Wilder Ruiz? Yeah, so that was just what I talked about. I'll just have a sip of water. Just bear with me. So Ra says, Babic versus Hrgovic for the summer in Croatian Stadium as a post-lockdown big event. Winner to fight Hunter in an eliminator. Well, if somehow on the back of just the short resume of 6 fights, if Babic can land some sort of stadium fight, if he's now a big enough name in Croatia to get a stadium fight, I would commend him for basically having sold himself to the masses and managing to get that. And if they did good numbers, if they could get that sort of fight, good on them. But, that is a tune-up for Filip Hrgovic. Let's be honest about it. So Baby says, hello, men. Hello to you too, I guess. Zelenakis says, Far has regressed a lot since his amateur days. The guy was dropped by an ancient Gwyn. He's definitely run hot and cold junior Far. There's been some performances where he's looked quite good, then others where you're just like, wow, it's just really flat. And there's been, obviously, a couple of years ago, he had some sort of stomach ailment, I think was it a portion of his intestinal bowel, one of the two, removed. He's had some other sort of ailment recently that led to the cancellation or postponement, I should say, of that Far Parker fight. And actually, one thing I want to say, I saw that DAZN had their lineup, and they said that this was part of their lineup where they're making us actually pay for it on pay-per-view back in New Zealand. So it's outside of Parker's DAZN deal. So they're charging pay-per-view in New Zealand, but then putting on DAZN elsewhere. So I'm a little bit peeved about that. And so now I know how Brits feel about having had to have paid £25 while the rest of the world was paying, $2 or $3 on that DAZN Global thing. Which, I've got to say, that was great, just paying a couple of dollars, as opposed to, because if that had have been on one of the usual providers here in New Zealand, for example, would have been $35 or $40, which I would have, you're never pleased about paying that sort of thing, but sometimes just for the quality and the consistency of a stream. Because obviously we know that sometimes if you do go to a streaming site, it's not reliable. And for me, for running the channel and having to cover fights, I can't just chance it. So, I have to pay for events to ensure that I've got something good to watch and I'm not missing out. So Joseph says, has Huey Fury peaked? We keep saying he is growing. Well, I'm pleased to hear that there's not too many people saying that he's a baby anymore. I mean, that is pleasing. There were some signs against Marius Vuk that he's looking to be more aggressive and have a bit of a different style. But we have to keep our expectations in check because it was a washed Marius Vuk. The guy's durable, he's big, he's a big lump. You know, he's going to be, you know, giving you some rounds, but not much else. I mean, it did crack me up, and I, you know, cannot forget this because I thought it was an outrageous comment. So, Bryan Kenny said that Marius Vuk is the biggest world-class big man in the world outside of, you know, the sort of top guys. And I sort of thought, well, it's really sort of trying to oversell that. But, you know, so, I mean, as some of the commentary on DAZN has been absolutely grueling to listen to, it's just been dreadful. So Ruben says, for all the tough learning fights Huey's had over the years, he's not looked too improved in the easier ones he's had in between. Hard to tell if he's learned from those tough ones. Yeah, I mean, we're only going to sort of see once he gets into a bigger and better fight. I mean, there was some optimism that he might be able to, depending on what level they went at. I mean, I would have rather have, I mean, sure, Marius Vuk was better than some of the, you know, the low-level dross he'd been facing. But it would have been better to have someone who could actually throw back and be a little bit competitive, but not necessarily at that sort of top 20 level. Because, you know, he sort of yo-yoed up and down. I would have, you know, much preferred to see someone that could test him a bit. I mean, but hopefully we actually see some of these Matchroom guys, because they've got a big stable, actually have a fight against each other. You know, you've got a whole screed of guys. We're just talking about some before. Zhili Zhang, Filip Hrgovic, Huey Fury, Martin Bakole. Any matchups of those, I think, for this point, for all of those guys, not bad fights at all. So Flashboxing TV says, be safe. Meister says, yes, Squared, been following since early. I think Fury outclasses Joshua anyway. He wants to. Skills pay the bills. Tom Syrat says, I'd like to see Babic versus Larty. It would be a good advancement for Babic. Yeah, I'm a little bit sort of, you know, it sort of seems there's been diminishing returns on Richard Larty and what he's been doing. I mean, I guess it depends how, you know, I think for Babic at the moment, they're just not paying his opponents that much money. So if they could get Larty for cheap, maybe that could be a fight. But yeah, the more I've seen of Larty, the less I've sort of been like, you know, interested in seeing him again, if that makes sense. So Tom says, I'd like to see okay, we just read that one. Ra says Zhang should get hand-picked contenders to be maneuvered into the top 10 as his big money opponent for AJ. Imagine the payday if he is hosted in Beijing Olympic Stadium. Yeah, but is there actually anything to back that up? Because some of the people that I've talked to who live in China, also Asian boxing, there's a number of other people who basically say Zhili Zhang doesn't really have a profile. And the guy is, you know, sort of honing in on 40 now, and he's not there's not much doing with his career at the moment. I think some of, you know, how big that fight is somewhat overstated. If anything, Josh was the draw, not the Chinese fighter. So, yeah, I don't know how true that really is. So Ricky says, if Whyte vs. Wilder ever gets made, who have you got winning? Personally think Wilder ices Whyte. Yeah, I mean, I think that's an interesting fight because I don't actually ever think it is going to get made. For all the, you know, animosity, the back and forth, and it also depends, when does it get made? Because I think there is, from this point onwards, and I've been saying for a couple of years now, the injuries, you know, the camps, just the sheer number of fights that Wilder's had now, the strain on his body, it's clearly catching up with him. I think he is going to be one of these guys where, you know, the sort of, he'll go down hill quite quickly, because when his athleticism starts to go, and the injuries, obviously, they've been setting in. I mean, he had, what was it, 1 round versus Dominic Brazil. Injured. He was injured in the Tyson Fury fight. He's been injured in a whole screed of fights. They're going to have to manage him carefully now. So Flashboxing TV says Dillian Whyte has always been Eddie Hearn's side chick. Well, I guess with Anthony Joshua being, you know, the high man on the totem pole, I mean, Dillian Whyte is the clear number 2, and for a guy in white who has only signed a, you know, fight-by-fight deal. So, I mean, to be the number 2 guy, and he's got a stable of heavyweights of, what, 10, 12, 13, something deep. it's not a bad place to be, because there's always alternative pay-per-view cards that Sky need filled. And who has Hearn been turning to and making rich in turn? Dillian Whyte. So he is the side chick, but he has also been making millions in the process. DT says, what fight besides Fury AJ would you like to see most in 2021? Well, I don't think that fight is going to happen in 2021. I sort of covered off at the outset. I'm just not so. I mean, what we're hearing now, and I'll go back to Bob Arum's comment there. I can report that everything so far has been going splendidly, and we hope to have a signed document within the next couple of weeks. We're all on the same page. I'm 95% confident the fight happens. See, that sort of talk, I mean, it's Groundhog Day. We've been hearing the same sort of stuff for 3 years. And I know some people will say, oh, well, it's different now. It's going to happen. It's Fury. It's, it's not Deontay Wilder or whatever. Just don't be shocked when it doesn't happen, especially at the moment. I mean, you've got things getting worse in terms of the pandemic in certain places of the world, the UK in particular. There's just not the opportunity to make the most money that they can from this once-in-a-generation fight. Why would they burn it off now when maybe if they wait a year, they can make more? And they've been building this undisputed fight for, since 2018, for over 3 years now. I'm just not confident it happens this year. I think it's more likely to happen later than now. But this rematch between Alexander Povetkin and Dillian Whyte, Eddie Hearn saying that is happening for March the 6th, so I covered off that in some of the news at the beginning. So that's a positive sign. So perhaps this is going to be some sort of similar situation like the fight camp. I don't know. I'll be interested too, because these announcements were meant to happen sort of earlier in the week. Now it's going to be taking place, the announcement on Friday. Maybe they're going to cook something up and have another sort of fanfare type sort of arrangement. Maybe it'll be studios. Maybe they're going to do it back in the O2 in terms of the smaller venue. I don't know. We'll have to see. But getting back to the comments here. I read Vladimir Klitschko's talking about a comeback. Okay, I'm going to stop right there, because this guy's been talking about a comeback basically since he retired. I mean, it's boring now. I mean, it's all sort of, I mean, he's just playing. I think Klitschko is like some of these other fighters who like to say stuff to keep themselves in the minds of boxing fans, keep themselves in the media, keep themselves relevant. And I think they like to do it because they know that they can do it and still get a reaction. I don't think he's coming back. And if he does come back, I'm not so sure that, he can be successful. Sure, he could probably win some fights, but I don't think he's winning a title. So Salty Sally says, Lucas Brown said Hearn contacted him about an all-Oz heavyweight prize fighter tournament in May. Well, there was a tweet that Brown put out a couple of weeks ago, and I did sort of respond, because I can't see his... I've just got the cat trying to... Hold on, I just got to let it out. Sorry about that. Must have been sleeping somewhere in the office. So he put a tweet out saying there was a number of fights that he wanted. He was talking about Fabio Wardley. Then there was, I think, the prize fighter tournament in May. Then he talked about Justice Hooney, and there were some other fights. And basically, I thought, on the whole list, I thought he's going to lose all of those fights. And probably, depending on who was in the tournament in May, I mean, it's hard to say. But yeah, he's been talking about he could fight for another 2 to 3 years, another 15 fights. And as people have rightly pointed out, he's probably going to get brain damage if he does that. But it wouldn't surprise me if Matchroom put on some sort of version of a prize fighter, because they've made no secret that they do want to expand further afield. They've obviously, in the past, couple of years, they've expanded out to Spain, Italy. He's talked about Eddie Hearn, having more of a presence in Australia, New Zealand, that sort of stuff. And this Joseph Parker fight with Junior Farr, this, although the event is being sort of run, the sort of event management side of thing by David Higgins, Joseph Parker's advisor and former promoter, it's actually being promoted by Matchroom in association with Lou DiBella. So I think we're going to see more of this, and now if Eddie Hearn is fully hitching his wagon to DAZN, because there's been speculation that when the Sky deal is up, that maybe he'll go fully to DAZN. And I'll just bring in something else that you may have seen that they were talking about. This is on the Campbell and Garcia card, they had their lineup for the next sort of couple of months, and they mentioned Parker Farr. And I was just saying this before, I was a little outraged that it was on pay-per-view in New Zealand, obviously $2 or $3 or whatever the cost is for DAZN elsewhere, depending on where you are with the new global sort of expansion. But I think we're going to see more of that. I think there is going to be a period of time where DAZN will only be willing to pay for certain fights. They're not going to be paying top dollar, but I think they will be all for licensing, fights that are held elsewhere. And if Matchroom can set up shop in different places, and then they can license to DAZN or to whoever else in the, whatever, I think they're going to do that. And they may run that sort of pseudo, most of the world gets it on DAZN for cheap, through licensing or whatever. But in the country where it is, it'll be on pay-per-view, like this Farr and Parker fight. And I could totally see the same happening in Australia, where, pay-per-views are quite prevalent, even for really low-tier cards. Could totally see it. And I think it might be sort of, even though, say, the model for DAZN's not pay-per-view, there's like a loophole around it. If you have a, external card that is on pay-per-view in one country but licensed to DAZN. Anyway, I'll just get back to the chat here. So Scott says, jab that like button. Yes, please. So we've got 68 in the building. We've been going for just over half an hour at this time. So wherever you are, morning, noon, or night, thank you for joining another Boxing Squared live stream. We did cover off some news at the top of the live stream, a few different bits and pieces that were going on. Now into your comments. So maybe go for another 10 or 15 minutes. It's coming up to 10 o'clock here New Zealand time. I've got to get into bed, get a good night's sleep and ahead of work tomorrow. But Ruben says, always baffled me that Whyte turned down fighting Pulev for IBF Mando only because Pulev won the purse bid. Any boxing fan knows the best Mando to fight if you want a title shot is the IBF. Yeah, he's had opportunities. He has. He turned it down for a money fight for Joseph Parker. And he made, because he was going to get 375,000, is it dollars or pounds? One of the two for taking the Pulev fight. Whereas for the Parker one, 7 figures. So, and we don't even know if it was, 2 million, 3 million pounds, I'm not sure. But they were getting basically a 50-50 split pay-per-view in that July of 2018. I can see why they've guided him to certain fights, and obviously money is a prime motivator as well. But he has had opportunities elsewhere. But that's the reason, money. That's why he took that fight against Parker. God of War says, but if they wait a year, there's the potential to lose it completely. Not necessarily. I mean, I was just talking in a video on Patreon just recently that I think there's a whole sort of playing chicken with this whole Undisputed, pushing it out. There's going to be some collateral damage along the way. But, the parties involved at the moment are backing their horse to be in the fight when it eventually does happen and when it's fully matured in terms of making the most money from it. So, I'm skeptical it's going to happen in 2021. So, John says, good morning, Boxing Squared from the UK. Good morning to you too. Litoy says, what's up, BS? What's your take on Fury versus AJ? Well, I don't think it's happening this year. I hate to sort of be a naysayer on that, but I think just with everything going on, they probably can't make as much money as possible. And guarantee one of two things is going to happen. Either the WBO calls the Usic mandatory, and they have, that mandatory has been there for over a year, or then the retired judge is going to come back and say, look, Deontay Wilder has a valid claim and Tyson Fury needs to fight him. I think we're waiting for one of those two things to happen, and when one of them does, then fans of one side will blame the other and everyone will sort of be back in a bun fight. But I think, what we're seeing now is just promoters stoking the fires, keeping it alive, and then they'll say, once we get these fights out of the way, we can maybe look at making this fight. I think it's more realistic to think it's probably at least 12 months away. Tom says, where would you like to see Kovnatski go next? I heard he will rematch Helenius, but if he wins that, what do you think his potential path upwards would look like? Well, actually, Adam Fahey, who's a friend of the channel, a moderator as well, he'd left a comment on, I'd just done a graphic, I'd put it up on Twitter, and Adam Kovnatski had actually commented to Adam Fahey's comment. Adam Fahey was talking about the weight of Adam Kovnatski, some of his tactics, and actually Kovnatski came back and sort of said, look, I'm going to do things different. I'm going to, X, Y, and Z. Said he wouldn't make the same mistakes. He'd sort of try to take the fight a bit deeper. Easy to say that. I mean, I think if that fight happens, he just has to win. Because if he wants to advance to anything approaching a heavyweight title, that just has to be a win for him. Otherwise, he just sort of comes back to the pack. And I think there is a lot of motivation from Kovnatski. I have seen a few recent photos where he looks like he might be slightly smaller. But you just never know with Kovnatski, because he's sort of been, hovering in those 260s. And for one of the fights, he'd admitted on Twitter, way back when, he cut about 10 pounds of water weight ahead of the weigh-in. I think if he's in better shape, he can beat Helenius if his tactics are a little bit better, if he's not blocking punches with his face. I mean, Adam Kovnatski can wear down and wear you out, and, the volume of punches, he can make it. I mean, people seem to forget that Helenius at times was in a spot of bother in that first fight. It just happened that Kovnatski, with his, face taking too much punishment, took one too many, and then all of a sudden it was downhill and all over. But, I think if he does win, there's definitely, I think the WBA seems to be the path, just where his ranking is, and there's more potential for title shots, but it's the WBA, and, you've got Mahmoud, Charr, and Trevor, Bryan, and obviously Helenius is the gold champion, so technically he'd be a champion within the WBA. He might be able to parlay that to, a fight against one of the others. I don't know. We'll have to see. But I think the WBA is the more logical route based on rankings and just opportunities. We'll have to see, though. But he can certainly win that fight. But, I mean, it wouldn't surprise me, Helenius, who is a big puncher, if he could repeat. Rapstar Boxing says, best fight which needs to get made for 2021 is Josh Taylor versus Jose Ramirez. Joseph says, can Hunter fight Ortiz and PBC fighters like Martin? Well, apparently he should be able to, because he was cut loose by Matchroom and DAZN, so he's a promotional free agent, as I understand it, a network free agent, and, so there is movement. But the shame for him at the moment is the demand for his services is down because there's less boxing. And from what he's managed to achieve, and he's generally considered, somewhere around a top 10 heavyweight, he's got certain expectations about what he wants to get paid. What he has been getting paid from those first fights on DAZN. So he's not going to want to take too much less than, he's been getting. And maybe that's the reason a fight with Filip Hrgovic has fallen through. Kalas Elland saying that's not going to happen next. It could be Martin Bakole that they have to see. I mean, ultimately boxing, when fights don't happen, generally comes down to money. I mean, there was all this energy between Hrgovic and Hunter about this fight's got to happen, we're going to have this. And there was some, a few words heard from Hrgovic which Hunter reacted to. Ultimately, though, it comes down to how much is going to go in the bank account. I mean, I can't begrudge them for wanting more, but, often, these sorts of fights don't come around too often. It sort of seemed that was the only fight that Hearn was wanting to really sort of maneuver Hunter into, was a fight with Hrgovic, as opposed to anyone else in the stable. So, yeah, maybe he could go to PBC. I mean, we'll have to see. I mean, I think really to get any real traction, he's got to sign some sort of deal somewhere. So, at the moment, obviously he's been cut loose by DAZN and Eddie Hearn, and I can't see them signing him. I can't see Hunter signing on immediately with Hearn, because obviously just been dropped by him, and why would you want to sign on for significantly less? Maybe Top Rank, maybe PBC, but yeah, we'll see. But I mean, if things start to improve, maybe he'll be in a better position. But yeah, sort of the last year or so has been a bit of a bust for Michael Hunter. So UK Rob Boxing says Vlad wants 75 mil to, safe to say he is retired for good. I mean, but who's going to pay him 75 million? I mean, Vladimir Klitschko, what is he now, 44, 45? I mean, he must be younger than 45. I mean, he's going to keep making these signals of a comeback until he's older than George Foreman was. And at that point, he probably drifts off. But he's going to keep teasing us. And I've stopped covering that sort of stuff because I just think it's all bogus. It's all fake news. Ruben says, Lucas Brown is too funny. One day he shits on Aussie boxing. Next day he's begging for Aussie fights. Yeah, I mean, this is the thing. I mean, he says a lot on social media. And if people call him out on it, or if they don't agree with him, apparently they're haters and all that sort of stuff. But yeah, he said he was never going to fight in Australia again, that, you know, he's slagging everyone off left, right and centre. And then he's in the position where he can't really get fights elsewhere. So he certainly has done a full 180, changed his tune. I mean, he's been out of the ring for a significant amount of time. I mean, I'm adamant the guy's a journeyman now, just without the journeyman record. So DT says, Babic said on his Instagram he'll be fighting Molina next, most likely. You have to remember, Molina's hooked in with Don King, so yeah, we'll see whether that's going to happen. But I mean, at this point, Molina's pretty washed. I mean, he's a husk of a husk. So Babic should be able to go through him like a hot knife through butter. I mean, Babic will have to watch out for a left hook or something like that, you know, one of Molina's sort of better punches, but he's just going to sort of steamroll him. So Right Hook Boxing in the building. He says, hello all. Question mark says, I came back and heard lose all fights, Lucas Browne. Oh, no, I was saying that there was a post that he'd put up a little while ago, a couple of weeks back, and number of fighters that he said he was targeting in 2021, and I was basically saying he's going to lose them all. Ruben Guerrero says, have you seen the fight poster for Charr Bryant? Apparently that's a pay-per-view. Well, it wouldn't surprise me. I mean, there's no fans. Is there TV? I mean, they're going to have to try to make some money somehow. I've seen a poster, but I haven't seen any details about a pay-per-view. I mean, is that actually happening? That's the question, because Mahmoud Charr is saying he doesn't believe it is, and that Don King's trying to basically screw him over. And that would surprise me. But at the same time, I mean, Manuel Charr seems to want to just get out of any fight, and he's looking for a cash out. He should just call the bluff. If he doesn't think it's going to happen, turn up, and then just, you know, if it doesn't actually go ahead, well, then Trevor Bryan gets stripped. So Ruben says the fight poster also looks like it was made on Word. I did see a few people, criticizing that on Twitter. So, yeah, it did look somewhat basic, but yeah, I mean, if you saw the press release, it was a headline and then had a bout sheet with 3 fights on it. So, yeah, they haven't exactly spent too much money on this one. David Randall says they should shut Lucas Browne's social media like they've done to Trump. Liam says, evening all. Hello to you, Liam Roskell. Big Boys Boxing. Man, I want undisputed, but I want it defendable, so AJ should just fight Usic and Fury fight Wilder. Then both are clear to have a trilogy if needed and defend all the titles after that. Yeah, but the thing is, though, it seems to be with the saga which Undisputed's dragged on. It's like, you know, some sort of television sort of series. There's always the next thing. Because you guarantee after, say for example, the Usyk fight happens next, whatever the circumstances are, then you're going to have another mandatory crop up because it'll be the WBA's turn. Because the last WBA mandatory, I think it was Alexander Povetkin in 2019, whatever year that was, 2018 I think it was. So that will come round again. Jamie says, morning Boxing Squared. I'm not amazingly hopeful of heavyweight undisputed this year either, at least until Fury Wilder situation is sorted. Yeah, who knows what's going to happen there. I mean, I'm just, you know, a sort of faded and jaded heavyweight, you know, sort of cynic at this point. I mean, if the promoters' lips are moving, they're probably lying. I mean, they tell us and show us what they want us to see, as opposed to the situation really being real. I mean, they'll be spinning us a good yarn, but it could fall over in a heartbeat. Often these things do. Ra says, some of those oil-rich Gulf states will complete vaccination within months. Given their small population, I can see them paying for AJ vs Fury to kickstart tourism. Yeah, but it's not just about the money coming from them. It's the pay-per-view and other revenue streams worldwide, which are significant. They want, I mean, I could see it being in a Gulf state or a Saudi Arabia or UAE or whatever, but in 2022. I think, you know, this whole thing, because at the moment, the vaccinations, you know, all sorts of places, it's going to take time. And I think with, you know, things being a little bit depressed in certain areas of the world economically, you know, and boxing is still not back up to full steam. I just think that they're not going to leave tens of millions of dollars on the table. Sure, they keep risking it, fighting other people, etc., but they're trying to make the risk worth it. They want it to be that once-in-a-generation fight to be worth it. I mean, take a step back. They're doing the Mayweather-Pacquiao sort of drag it out for 5 or 6 years. We're already into, 3.5 years into, this whole undisputed will they, won't they. Depending on, it doesn't matter who the players are. That fight has been there to be made and probably could have been made. I mean, if the horrific sums of money weren't involved, probably would have happened by now. But then again, it probably would have happened, a number of times, since the last time it happened a generation ago. But everyone wants to maximize the bang for the buck when they can get into that position. So Salty Sally says, Kovnatski too busy tweeting about Bitcoin. Yeah, I have seen that. John says, anyone with a solid jab and distancing punishes Kovnatski. Imagine Joyce. Well, I think Joe Joyce is going to be a bad style matchup for a number of different fighters. So I think it's easy for people to write him off, but he's extremely effective. So Ruben says Hunter is in a position where he can be turning down fights because of pay, especially as he's so vocal on being avoided. Yeah, but at the same time, that whole, I'm the can man. If you don't take the fights, all of a sudden you can become the can't man. And, he hasn't been in a meaningful fight since the end of 2019. There's going to be a number of guys, and Hunter may end up being one of them, that could take certain fights, and they may not be the best financially, but they might be the best career-wise. And there'd be a number of guys who are going to time their run wrong because of COVID, and all of a sudden 1 or 2 years has gone by, maybe even more, and they're no really advanced in their career, and they haven't really got any decent paydays to sort of speak of, and no meaningful wins. There's going to be guys that get it all wrong. So Kenneth says Robert Helenius versus Prince Charles Martin, former IBF heavyweight champion. I wouldn't mind that fight, but it doesn't look like that one's going to happen. Joseph says, good morning, Boxing Squid. Good morning to you too. Kenneth says, Joshua and Deontay Wilder is a side of heavyweight. Darren says, Don King, he must be a 100-year-old by now. I think he's late 80s. I mean, he had a birthday just some time ago, but is this fight between Charr and Bryan going ahead? I mean, because it kind of looks like he's, got these shenanigans sort of cooking, and he wants to maybe make Stavern versus Trevor Bryan. I think that's his optimal sort of outcome. Try to, outmaneuver Mahmoud Charr and then try to say at the last moment, well, everything was here. We did everything. You should have come over, but now we're going to make the fight for Stavern and Charr. I mean, not Charr, Bryan. But I think what's going to happen is, because it seems to be both sides are insulating themselves, trying to publicly, show this is what we've done. We've done all the right things. And then they'll be starting to gear up for a potential court case. Totally see that. Then they keep their belts, no fight. Wouldn't surprise me at all. Trashboxer says, is there any info about Valine versus Brazil? Will it be a 12-rounder? Any title involved? Not sure of any title, but it looks like it's going to be a 10-rounder. And I have seen some people get really upset at the suggestion that Dominic Brazil is washed and that Otto Valine is going to, outpoint him and basically canter to a decision, which I think that this has the potential to be a good showcase fight for Otto Valine. I don't really rate Brazil anymore. I think his durability is on the slide, and I don't think it has been diminishing returns in terms of his performances in recent years. But some people are adamant that he's just going to spark Otto Valine, and they get upset that people say that Brazil is washed. I don't know if that's related to Brazil being one of Wilder's wins, because sometimes that sort of stuff, this latent sort of, this guy fought Wilder, so he is the best thing since sliced bread. I don't know. Right Hook Boxing says, Boxing Squared, you think Wilder returns against Helenius? Well, it seems Helenius is going to be fighting Adam Kovnatski in the rematch, and Kovnatski seems to think that as well. So, yeah. Roscoe says, love the idea of Usic Parker. Potentially that could happen. I mean, I was talking about, I don't actually think, because there's a lot of people that think that Joseph Parker, if he beats a junior far, is all of a sudden going to get the number 2 spot in the WBO, and there'll be an Usyk Parker fight. I'm not so sure that happens. I just can't see Anthony Joshua dropping a belt. And if Usyk, he's just going to stick there for his mandatory shot. He's not just going to randomly just fight Parker for nothing on the line. So I like the idea of that fight, but I'm just not so sure it happens. So Rooney says, hello Boxing Square, do you think by the end of 2021 the heavyweight titles will be in Warren's stable or Hearn's stable, bearing in mind the Wilder and Usyk situation? I don't think there's going to be undisputed. I was just saying before, I just did about 20 minutes talking about some of this on Patreon, sort of breaking down the why and some of the other external peripheral figures to this. So once in a generation fight. If there's all the stuff happening with COVID, which is happening, at the moment as well, that's just taking money away from the fight. They're not going to leave tens of millions of dollars on the table, not for a once-in-a-generation type fight. So Ace says, Usyk can be difficult for AJ due to his style. I mean, yes, and I mean, I would have been more confident in an Alexander Usyk pick against Joshua before, I do think that maybe Usyk is slightly past prime. Some of the injuries that he's had in the last couple of years and the inactivity, I do think that's maybe starting to show. That performance against Derek Chisora, confirmed he was a heavyweight, at least in the top 10, top 15, whatever. But I think there was enough there to sort of show, he was gassing a bit later in the fight. He was able to be bullied at times. He was fighting a guy that was smaller than him. Alexander Usyk was the guy with the height and the reach in that fight against Chisora. So, I mean, I'm sure that Joshua's camp is probably more confident now about an Usyk fight than they've probably ever been before. Ruben says, can see Usyk making Whyte look very average. Whyte's feet not up to much. Morning from Cromwell, says Matt Whyte. Morning to you too. Joshua Piling says Kovalev predictions. I would be picking Bektemir Melikuziev to win that fight. On that card was going to be Cassius Chaney, the American heavyweight, unbeaten. And I had heard he was going to be on that card, and I did send him a couple of messages just to check in. Is this actually true? Is it going to go ahead, etc.? But he doesn't seem to think that it will. He's got a few concerns that it might be sort of postponed due to COVID. So, yeah, we'll have to, I guess, wait and sort of watch on that front. And with things sort of spiraling in different places in the world, potentially it could be. So Sam says Whyte is Wilder's level, and that's why Wilder ducks Whyte, because he doesn't want to face the fact that he's not really up there, says Sam Greer. Unga says Kovalev washed, he gets starched. Yeah, I think Bektemir Melikuziev, although that fight, I think, didn't they say it was at 178? I mean, even though Melikuziev is 168, he's a guy that I sort of think should be probably a middleweight, but I digress. So Jeremy is off to bed. Good night to you. Thanks for tuning in. 76 in the building. Thank you wherever you are, morning, noon or night. I guess we'll go for another 5 minutes or so, so please get those questions in. Kenneth says, FA Ajagba versus Luis Ortiz. Now that Ajagba's with Top Rank and Ortiz obviously still with PBC, probably less likely to happen, as it were when Ajagba was with PBC. Can't sort of see that happening. But I would note that Ajagba, he's obviously being trained by Keiko Roma, or he's been working in that gym as well with Jared Anderson. So I think that sort of sparring is going to be really beneficial for Ajagba, having a guy like Anderson who's so versatile and can give him so many different looks. I think it's going to be good for his development. So Matt says, who would win out of top 10 heavyweights in a Royal Rumble format? Really depends who was matched with who, really. Ace says, Rivas versus Parker. Well, Rivas isn't up to much at the moment, and he hasn't been at heavyweight since that loss to Dillian Whyte. There's talk he's going down to bridgerweight, obviously number one ranked bridgerweight in the WBC, but he hasn't fought there as of yet. So Thomas says he's just arrived on the chat, so hello to you too. Sam says Rivas Parker's a good fight, so is the Jugba versus Ortiz. I'd pick Parker and Ortiz to win those fights. I think in terms of a Jugba and Ortiz, yeah, if it was, I mean, Ortiz is still a dangerous guy, and the style, Jugba hasn't seen too many southpaws, especially ones that are good counter-punchers with power. So that's going to be something that, it's hard to get those sorts of sparring partners. Ruiz versus Ortiz would be awesome. Well, that was a fight that Ortiz was calling for. Ruiz said he was willing to take, but needed a tune-up first. And then all of 2020 went by. So, I mean, who knows if that's still on the table. So Liam says, any news on Hemi being on the Parker versus Farr card? Well, just before Christmas, because Hemi Ahil was meant to be fighting in Auckland on, I think it was a December the 11th card at Sky City. I had been in touch with his manager because that was cancelled, and I sort of said, look, what's going on? And he said, there will be an announcement, it's coming up, da-da-da-da-da. But I think, then Parker Farr got postponed pretty much immediately after that. So I wonder if he will end up being on that card, especially because Ludabella has a role in that card, and surely he'll be able to get another one of his fighters on there. And in terms of, just beefing up the card, it's going to be good to have another decent heavyweight on there. Because generally what's happened with a lot of these Duco events, because before Joseph Parker was sort of at the world level and sort of fighting off overseas, from about fight number 5 or 6 to about 16, it was all pay-per-view events in New Zealand. There'd be Parker versus a journeyman or whatever as the main event, and then there'd be just a terrible undercard, and they'd charge you $40 for the privilege. So Stefan says, thanks for the stream, informative as always. Take care, man, and take care to you too. Thank you for tuning in. Thomas says Zhang versus Keane would be entertaining, or Anderson versus Takam. I didn't like what I saw with Simon Keane versus Sergey Lyakovich. I don't want to say played with his food, it was more he was reticent to engage with his food in that one. Lyakovich was washed, and Keane just seemed gun-shy. I think Zhang probably knocks Keane out. Right hook boxing, do you think we'd get Hemi versus Huni in the future? Probably not. I don't think they'll probably look to... it's the same sort of situation they'll want to get Hemi Ahil into, is that what Junior Farr's into, some sort of big money fight. And I think at this stage, if Hemi Ahil was to face Justice Huni, or in the next year or two, the money sort of wouldn't be there, sort of comparable to what Farr's getting to face Parker. Hemi Ahil is a good heavyweight, really good power, good skills. He's just a bit too undersized at 6 foot. It's not to say he can't do some things, but the style matchups are going to be important now. Thomas says, hey from the UK, hello to you too. Joseph says, what happens to a Jugba this year? Well, I still think that, he needs more seasoning, more development. There's been a lot of criticism of him, but when you consider the sort of matchmaking, he's been matched, I think, rather appropriately for his level of development. And it hasn't always impressed people where he's been at, but he's never really been... close to losing a fight. Sure, he got dropped against Kaladze, but he was, beating Kaladze up before that, and obviously then went on to finish him off. Yeah, I still think that we've got to give a Jugba a little bit more time before we pass judgment, because clearly he's still quite raw. Do you think we will see anything of Bogdan Dinu this year? I think if we do, it's, obviously just selling his name and record as, some sort of, someone's on the way up. And, it wouldn't surprise me to see in another few fights someone like a Jared Anderson facing Bogdan Dinu and then, stopping him. Dinu, I think, is going to fall into this whole sort of, Mikhail Wallish, Alexander Demetrenko. You can probably think of a few others. They give it a go for 3 or 4 rounds max, and then that's them. Ace says it's time for better undercards. What happened to we need more just 50-50 fights? That sort of sentiment died pretty quickly. Ruben says, how would you see Hunter versus Gassiev going? It's interesting. I've never sort of thought about that fight. Gassiev would be the slightly smaller man, I want to say. Isn't Hunter? Maybe they're about the same size. But, I mean, in some ways, because Michael Hunter, has got that in and out style, it's going to be hard for Gassiev to pin down because Gassiev doesn't have great feet. I think we just saw a guy like a Ryan Garcia, his footwork didn't look flash. Gassiev, just sort of, if Hunter is in and out turning him, it could end up being a less impressive sort of version of what Usic did to Gassiev, if that makes sense. I mean, I think Hunter can just, I think Hunter's going to be one of these guys. Some fights he's going to look really good in, other fights not so much, but actually what he's doing is quite effective. Yeah. So Unga says David Nika and Hemia Hill both on the Parker card. No opponents yet, and trying to get opponent for John Parker too. So I hadn't seen that Hemia Hill was on the card, but that doesn't surprise me in the least. It always looked like that was going to happen. So David Nika, he's a New Zealand fighter turning pro, and that he had been destined to go to the Olympics. Obviously, that's sort of, we'll have to see what happens with Tokyo. That's been delayed already. Maybe it won't go ahead at all. So Harrison Ford says Parker looking sharp in training. He's had world level experience, top 5, maybe just. No, I don't think he's top 5, not at this point. I mean, he hasn't been in a real fight for 2.5 years. And, the junior far fight is not a world level fight. It's not. And Joseph Parker hasn't had a, meaningful win since 2017. Wrap your head around that. Ace says Fury vs Wilder 3 is a waste of time, and Trash Boxer says, what value does the WBA gold title hold? It's more of a bargaining chip for better fights within the WBA. Is it though? I mean, the first holder, Joe Joyce, didn't really seem to maximise that. He got a fight against a Husk of a Husk in Stavern, and that was it, and then he dropped the belt. I mean, it's probably got to pay more sanctioning fees to hold it. That's probably where the value lies, and the value is towards the WBA, not the fighter. Anyway, it's 1 hour 4 into the stream. I'm going to wrap it up there. Got to head off to bed, but thank you for joining me again. Wherever you're on the world, 65 in the building, smash that thumbs up if you can on the way out. Please, that would be much appreciated. Until next time.